Thank you very much indeed. My goodness, that morphing image was quite a memento mori. I thought I might be having an episode at one point there for a second. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to discuss a vision of how different technologies that we are working with today can coalesce and mutually support each other to help us to create a very new kind of society going forward. Imagine for a moment that you were wandering through Lincoln Park, a few blocks away, and you came across a magic lamp lying in the bushes, and you gave it a rub, and you were asked to present your 3 wishes. In certain ways, this is kind of what we have today with machine intelligence as it is evolving. AI in the old days, the days of our grandfathers and grandmothers, was something that was hand-coded. Everything needed to be explicitly programmed in order to fulfill a function. Today, we have something very different. It's almost like management by objectives. You simply express what you're trying to achieve, and the machine intelligence can work back from that end goal and figure out the paths to get there. These kinds of technologies are able to do all kinds of amazing feats, just like a genie, in ways that we could never program, that we could never express in language or in mathematics. But we know it when we see it. And by providing these examples, the machines can be a genie for us. We've seen steady evolution in this technology. We're coming to a new world, one where meta-learning is bringing machine intelligence towards something more generalizable, a little bit like our own 86 billion neurons. Meta-learning is able to deal with all kinds of different complex problems. In this case, not just getting out of the way of the wall, but dealing with an undulating floor, and it's going to climb up these stairs and jump across a chasm. And you see it's a little bit ataxic. It's a little bit uncomfortable looking, right? It's not Usain Bolt. It's not an amazing athlete, but it is good enough to manage. What we have today, therefore, is an ability to solve very complex problems in fantastic new ways. We're able to make sense of chaos and to automate the ineffable. What is ineffable? It's when we don't have an effing way to describe something. It is ineffable. And this is something magical. About 100 years ago, the great philosopher and logician Whitehead said that civilization advances by extending the number of important operations which we can perform without thinking about them. Essentially, automation. Now, that automation can be done with a computer. It may also be done through institutions. For example, it's very convenient that if we have an accident, we can simply call 911 and we know that we will be safe. We're coming to a new world where we are influencing machines and machines are influencing us as well. Machine learning goes both ways. Just as they say that the 5 people closest to you are kind of who you will become, if we are interacting with machines and algorithms a lot, they're going to influence who we become, who we are. And unfortunately, some of those algorithms are a little bit naughty. Today, on the internet, about 50% of transactions or interactions are by humans, and the other 50% is by bots. Some of them benign and harmless, others a little bit cheeky. They are trying to figure out how to scam people or to create spam or to look for a way to attack a system. This is problematic because a lot of these things are going to be starting to act as like a digital poltergeist, starting to really mess with our heads in the years to come. I do a lot of work with the IEEE, trying to create a mechanism for generating something like a credit score for algorithms to know whether they are trustworthy or not and to what degree and in which areas, whether that's transparency, accountability, or their potential for bias. But I think we need to do more. I think that rules are only a beginning, because we don't teach our children hard rules, right? That's not really how they learn about morality or the basics of human interaction. They learn by observation. Machines are getting very sophisticated very quickly, and in certain ways they're acting like very young human beings, like little toddlers, struggling to make sense of the world and struggling to make sense of us. And heaven knows we human beings are a complex, funny little bunch, aren't we? There's an emerging domain, one that's going to be very important in the 2020s, called machine ethics, sometimes also described as value alignment. How do we align machines with our values, the things that we preference? A few years ago, there was a very important data set, a very important set of knowledge that we could teach machines with, called EthicsNet. It was created by this lady, Fei Li, and her team. It was very simple. It was just clouds and trucks and teddy bears and things like that, annotated, so that machines could work out what they were looking at. But more than just teaching the machines, it created a very important method of benchmarking technology. We could test whether one algorithm was better than another. And that benchmarking capability led to a very rapid takeoff in the capability of machine intelligence. I'm super inspired by this because I think what would have happened if we didn't have EthicsNet? We would be living in a very different world where deep learning hadn't really been discovered. Very different world indeed. And so I'm inspired by that to create something called EthicsNet, a crowdsourced data set of behaviors, particularly trying to capture pro-social behaviors. Now, I know the name is EthicsNet, but really it's more about kindergarten-style morality. Very simple little social rules that just make life a little bit nicer. We don't teach our children rules explicitly that much. They tend to learn by observation. They tend to learn from Saturday morning cartoons more than explicit rules and regulations. And machines will need to teach the same way. But we can't do it all alone. If we are to enable the raise of the machines, it will take a global village of many different people, of different demographics and different cultures, to all of them put their own respective values into the machines, so that machines can meet us where we happen to be. But there are a little bit of a problem with getting people to coordinate online these days. I don't know if you've noticed this. The internet was supposed to bring us together. It was going to make information cheap and free, and all of us would forget about our differences and our different nationalities, and we would come together as one collective cyber citizen. And unfortunately, it hasn't always worked out that way. We find ourselves today in a tricky time, a time of increased polarization, where people are often pulling apart. And it's not just that people are failing to understand each other so much, but that these things have knock-on effects, for example, within employment. Certain sectors of our economy have a very strong polarization towards one end or another. And that could create something like a caste system, where some people are simply locked out of certain opportunities. I don't like that at all. I don't know about you. That sounds awful. I'm trying to put together something like a Geneva Conventions for the culture war to help us to create these rules of how we engage in these kinds of conflicts in a way that helps to protect the innocent. I'd love to have your feedback on it and, send us some of your impressions. This isn't the first time in history that we've experienced these kinds of schisms in society. In fact, they go a very, very far, long way back, perhaps even 10,000 years. This is one of the very first cities that we ever had on this planet, called Çatalhöyük, over in what is now Turkey. Now, if you look at this city, you'll see it hardly even merits the name. It's not like a modern city. There's no streets. All of the buildings are almost entirely the same, they're just these little cubes. Very strange. These people were huddled together like this in a kind of a human hive. But unfortunately, this little conurbation of the first farmers didn't last very long. If we look at the archaeological record, we see that for a while people came together and lived in these increasingly larger developments. And then for a space of about 1,000 years, they went back to living in little hamlets again. We abandoned the idea of cities for about a millennium. Why? We looked at a number of different potential things, whether it was pestilence or famine or these kinds of problems. No, it seems as if the problem was essentially one of social issues and lack of trust. You see, these people were the first farmers. And farming is an interesting way to make a living. If you do it well, and if you're lucky, and if the rains come at the right time, you can turn 1x of effort into 10x of output. But of course, not everyone is going to be so lucky. And the people living in these places, they had a nomad's worldview. And for a nomad moving around, having stuff, material goods, is kind of a white elephant because you have to take it with you. And so when they witnessed all of this inequality, it led to a schism in their society. They weren't quite sure how to make sense of it, because if you turned your back for 1 minute, Alibaba and his friends will come and take your stuff. Trust is so important, really important, for all societies. I would express it at a fundamental level as consistency over time. When things operate in the way that you expect them to over multiple occasions, that will tend to inspire trust. And there is no greater predictor of happiness in any society on this planet than trust. Even when you control for GDP and all of these other things, trust is what really makes society function. After this great dip, when people went back to living in villages for a long time and abandoned cities, great kings and queens created things like the Code of Hammurabi, laws that we could all agree on and that we all knew what we were supposed to be doing. This enabled us to coordinate in new ways, and it also increased trust. And trust and coordination are a virtuous cycle. Coordination makes trust easy, and trust makes coordination easy in turn. And if you let that go for a little while, you create something very different, very advanced cities, where there's a lot of different stratification. There's people working on different things. And that division of labor leads to massive economic development. We saw something similar around about the year 1682 or so. The Ottomans invaded Vienna for the second time, and they were repulsed. They went home, but they left behind something very important, something that most of you will have interacted with today: coffee. And that coffee was picked up by some enterprising people, and they turned it into the first coffee houses in Europe. And for the first time, it created an interface for people to talk, not just in the universities and in the salons, but there in the coffee house, reading the pamphlets and magazines and newspapers and learning and sharing ideas in a way that didn't have drunk people going over their shoulders. And from these coffee houses came the first insurance companies, the first stockbroking companies. This enabled a new form of complexity based on being able to connect in new ways, to build trust and to coordinate much more powerfully. We created things like the joint stock company, where the CEO had to give the shareholders information, and if they weren't satisfied, they could come together and get rid of that CEO. And we could pool capital in many new ways. And so this increased our complexity, and that changed everything. The world before the Industrial Revolution and since is night and day. Societies increase in complexity when coordination and trust become easier. They must also decrease in complexity when trust and coordination become more difficult. This is an iron law. Tolstoy in Anna Karenina made the observation that all happy families are alike, and each unhappy family is unhappy in their own way. And societies are exactly the same. Happy societies have good laws, good institutions, a reasonable level of equality. But the unhappy societies, they're all miserable for their own particular issues, their own particular plights. We're living in a very interesting time where things such as machine economics, as I described, blockchain, DHT, these kinds of emerging technologies, are helping us to align our societies in new ways, helping us to share knowledge, build trust and coordination through aligned incentives in a decentralized manner, which is very challenging to corrupt or to take over. Other technologies such as swarms are enabling us to create radically new forms of democracy, helping us to make collective decisions that harness the wisdom of the crowd. Instant democracy. This is going to enable something very important, something very needed that we've never been able to do before. The management and accounting of externalities in an efficient way. Externalities, that economics term, right? When you do something and it affects an unrelated third party. Things like pollution. Typically, governments are trying to minimize externalities and to create accounts for them, to fine somebody. But it's a difficult thing. It's difficult to prove. It's difficult to make restitution for. And it's created the world that we have today. A world where many of us live in unparalleled luxury, which would have been unimaginable just a few decades ago. But a lot of that luxury is because we have passed on the costs to other people. We have privatized the benefits and socialized the costs to the commons. And this is the story of the world, especially since the Industrial Revolution, writ large upon it. We're only just beginning to discover our effects, the magnitude of them. Those Google Street View cars that come through your neighborhood once or twice a year, nowadays they don't just have cameras on them. They have pollution sensors as well. And they discovered that within the US, one industry making fertilizer emits 3 times more methane than all other industry in the US combined. And methane is kind of nasty. It's about 80 times stronger than CO2 on climate in the shorter term. We had no idea. And we have no idea what other kinds of effects are going on out there. But we're beginning to learn. These little particulate sensors are becoming very cheap. You can buy them on Amazon for about $30. And that price is plummeting all the time. Within a few years, we will start to have these embedded in common devices like a smart home speaker or our cell phones. And we can start to aggregate this information, to pull it together into platforms like openaq.org. That's open air quality. And that means that we can triangulate this stuff. We know who is doing what, to what degree, for the first time in human history. And what you can measure, you can finally begin to manage. That is a huge deal. And we have no idea how big a deal it is just yet. Of course, if you look at this map, most of it is ocean. Most of it is Terra Nullius. It doesn't belong to anyone. The commons. And the problem of the poor commons, which gets so abused, is that it has no real identity. And if it has no real identity, then it has no rights. Over in Ecuador, the Quechua people, they have this concept of sumakosai, that is the embodiment of nature. And they have it actually written into the Ecuadorian constitution that nature must be protected, that the rights of nature must be respected. Of course, this kind of way of thinking about the world doesn't extend much into the rest of the international realm, but it might, it could. There's a really cool paper I read a few weeks ago where they created zip codes for all kinds of little villages and hamlets in the world that didn't have them, just by looking at satellite information. And they generated these zip codes automatically based on clusters of dwellings that they could see from space. There's another development called what3words.com, and they enable you to pinpoint a 3-meter square patch of anywhere on the planet. To me, that says identity, right? So you can give identity to a little gully, a little gorge, a little river, a little patch of the ocean. There's another principle in law called guardian ad litem. It's where a foster child, for example, that has no official guardian, somebody else can step in to be a guardian for that child. What if we had an environmental person, a little bit like a corporate person, but without agency? So it had rights, a bit like a child, some rights, but not so much the responsibilities. We could give personhood to this, and then we could automate the creation of redress when externalities have been detected. This is the world that we're working towards, a world where we're able to automatically detect who's doing what, to what degree, to whom, and automate the payment of some restitution. And it's this that is going to really enable us to hit those SDG goals, whether that's in the economic sphere, the environmental sphere, and even the social sphere. I'd like to start a conversation at pacha.org, P-A-C-H-A, to see how we can create interoperability between different people working on these problems, and to enable this new technology, an internet for externalities, for the very first time. This is what is going to enable us to have our cake and eat it too, to enjoy our amazing advanced civilization in a sustained way. If we can achieve this, we can have that goal, we can have that dream. If we don't achieve it, we're in dire straits. Let me finish up then by talking not so much about the environmental sphere, but about social externalities. About 100 years ago, G.K. Chesterton, of Chesterton's Fence fame, wrote a book called What's Wrong with the World? And he said that we alter the human soul to fit its conditions, instead of altering human conditions to fit the human soul. I think that's wisdom that stands throughout the ages. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, since the Industrial Revolution, we've gotten so very good at meeting those bottom runs, right? Safety and comfort and all that good stuff. But what about our needs for love and belonging, self-esteem, self-actualization? Good luck, right? We haven't yet industrialized the meeting of those needs. But we have an opportunity to for the first time. Instead of trying to meet them through the means through which we meet the bottom ones instead. If you buy this product, your life will be better. No. What makes human beings truly happy? Nothing will make you more happy than recognizing that you can lean on the shoulder of a friend when times are tough. And nothing will make you more sad than recognizing that a cherished relationship that you once enjoyed, for whatever reason, is no more. Some animals have to eat meat to survive, like a tiger. They are obligate carnivores. Human beings are obligately social. Moreover, we are obligately cooperative. The first industrial revolution was about harnessing the power of muscle, of strong human beings and non-human animals. The informational revolution was about augmenting the human mind, helping us to think and process information in new ways that were no longer possible. I think we're coming to something beyond that, an augmentation of the human heart and soul. And it's going to come from machine intelligence helping us to solve very complex problems, machine economics helping us to build trust and to align our incentives in new ways, and machine ethics helping us to put all of this to the finest of purposes that really exalt what it means to be a human being. The interdependence revolution, or in another way, a reformation, an industrial reformation. That's what we're building. If all of us can come together to put a little bit of heart and soul into that cold and distant machine. Thank you.